All right, let's get into it. Hello, everyone who is joining. I'm Manushka. I'm community lead at Miro, and I want to introduce you to Ashton Kusino. She is a director, performance solution lead, learning and development enthusiast, curious innovator with a passion for meaningful change. She is an avid reader with a TBR list longer than her expected lifespan, still collecting more books. She is a change maker, challenger of the status quo, and seeker of new and interesting ways to support personal and professional development. She's always asking why. As we get into our session, I want you to ask yourselves, how many times have you been asked over the past 2 years to digitalize learning that was previously delivered in person? As learning professionals, we need to seek out and leverage the right tools to support our people, regardless of how they're joining us. We need to be flexible, accessible, and relevant. And we need to be all the things right now. No sweat, right? In this session, we will explore the ins and outs of using Miro as a way to create engaging virtual learning experiences and to provide opportunities for interaction and to take learning online into a whole new level. You all, I present to you Ashton.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And thank you all for being here. Welcome. I am really excited to share everything that I know and love about using Miro as a virtual classroom environment. And if you facilitated anything online recently or even in the past, you know firsthand how tricky it can be to maintain engagement levels, which, of course, no one's fault. It isn't easy to stare at a screen listening for extended periods of time. It's hard enough to sit at your computer all day, but at those times, you're often working, and for the most part, your brain is engaged. As learning professionals, we try every trick in the book to make our learning experiences more interesting, more interactive. We're trying to capture that elusive engagement level. And when I was introduced to Miro, it became clear that this could be used to create those interesting learning environments that I was really looking for. Of course, nothing is perfect. We can't replicate an in-person experience in the virtual world, no matter how hard we try. Humans like to interact, and there's something about being face to face, side by side, feeding off the energy in the room that can't be captured online, and that's a-okay. We'll always have in-person learning, but we are going to continue to see less of it. For those moments when we do need to train online, Miro offers a way to kick up that engagement level several notches, and today I'd just like to take a really quick peek at some of those examples. We are going to start with some icebreakers. And at this time, I'd love for you to join me in the Miro board. We're going to have a few people in there, which is fine. It might get a little busy, but it's part of the fun. So I'll wait here for a second while you get the link to the board, and I'll wait to see some folks start popping in. Also, one of my favorite parts about Miro is when you see everyone start coming into the board and moving around. Here we go. Excellent. Fantastic. I love it. So, icebreakers are often the first activities we do together and in a training environment. It's a great way to get to know each other, to start interacting, start talking, ideally coming out of our shell. And when we're using Miro, we can combine getting to know each other with getting to know Miro. There's a learning curve when running a class in a new piece of technology. I do find the learning curve here is quite small, and what tends to work best is letting folks try it out, fumble around, ask some questions. I also like to include that simple how to navigate video made by Miro for those who want to check it out. The more comfortable our people are interacting with the board, the more likely they are to engage and therefore hopefully ignore what else is happening on their laptop. I also like to try to keep those Miro interactions to a minimum. So far, folks aren't trying to learn all of the ways they can interact right off the hop. If it's too much, maybe people get frustrated or distracted by the challenge of learning all of the things. So I can see y'all already looking at some of the activities. You can zoom in. I've got 4 examples here. Zoom in, explore them, take a look. All of these activities are double duty. They require people to move around, interact with objects, move objects, change their appearance, add comments, type on them. These are all actions we would be using in the class. So go ahead and continue checking them out. I'd love to see some of your stickies. There's a map here too. If you'd like to drop a pin on the map and add a comment about where you're visiting us from today. And I'll just give everyone a few moments here to play around and to fill those out. One of them is a board that we would duplicate or replicate for many people, but I wanted to include, and that's example number 3, is really more of a singular example, but it's a nice example, so I included it. But the other ones you can all interact with. Great, I love it. As you're doing this, you may notice that in some cases I've spaced out the objects as much as possible. Ideally, our classes are run with smaller groups. This is a bigger group we'd normally use to run a virtual classroom with. But as folks start to select and grab things, your flag can sometimes cover the objects, or even just selecting an object can create that sort of spacing issue. So by kind of spacing them out, having folks zoom in on the objects helps ensure that doesn't happen. And I also make sure to lock down any non-interactive components. You're not moving around the backgrounds or accidentally moving something. I've definitely had that happen in a session before. So locking those pieces down really helps with that too. Yeah, I love all of the stickies I'm seeing here. This is fantastic. Thank you, everybody. Zoom in here. Lots of colors too. I love it. Check out the map. Very cool. Lots of different pins being dropped on the map too, so we can kind of get a feel visually where people are coming from. We have that in the chat as well too to kind of see where folks are coming from. But I really do love the visual of the map to start seeing the different locations that people are joining us from. I think that's also really exciting. And then getting to learn a little bit more about those people, right? Who are you? What do you do? What's your fun fact? See if we have any fun facts. Ready for a nap, Natalie. I love it. I feel like I'm almost there myself, but when aren't we ready for a nap? It's busy days. Never eaten a hot dog. That is a very interesting fun fact. Thank you for sharing that. Love it. What else do we have? Very cool. People are just coming from all over. I love it. I can still see people moving around the board. I also like to encourage people when we're doing these, especially in classrooms, to move around the board too. Check out who else is in the room with us, right? Who are they? Where are they coming from? Do you have anything in common? I think I saw even in the chat somebody sharing a connection about geographical location, which is also really neat when you're joining a virtual event and don't know anybody else is going and you find yourself making those initial connections. I think that's really neat. So using these activities that require people to interact with the board in the same way they will be doing in the session ensures they're getting a chance to figure it out up front when we have the time to do so. I also like to add in little tips and hints on the board. You may have seen some of them in different places. I only use them for things that are not as obvious to solve for. So in example number 4, they're little leaf icons that you use to write your name on. These are grouped objects and do require some extra clicking. So I make sure to add the tip so people know if they're clicking on it and it's not quite doing what they need it to do, it's not them. There's just extra pieces to do. I find that helps as well. And again, we have less time when doing virtual sessions. So combining these activities of get comfortable in the board, start to meet each other, make sure we're using that time in a really effective, efficient, and again, engaging way. There's lots happening on the board. There's lots to see, lots to look at, and lots to contribute to. I also do find that you often get folks who pick up Miro a little bit faster, and they're offering support and guidance to their colleagues or peers in the room as well, which is an added bonus. It gets people hands-on, right away, engaged, and focused on the classroom. And now once we have people on the hook, hopefully, we want to move them on to the activities. There are many ways we can set up our classroom, but we only have a short time together today, so we're going to take a quick peek at a few examples. Before we jump over, I will say, if at any time you're seeing something and thinking, yeah, but I need to deliver lecture content, Ashton, so while this is lovely, what do I do during that time? I was able to fully ditch PowerPoint in favor of Miro. Whatever it is you were going to put in that slide can go on the board. And not only can it go into Miro, you can probably make it more interactive than you had originally planned for. A lecture on theory can quickly become a hypothetical brainstorming activity that has the facilitator dropping in pieces of information that would have been delivered via the spiel, making it far more interactive than simply listening to someone talk about a concept or a theory. I encourage you to try it out. It's the more you experiment with alternates, the more you find opportunity to change the direction of your learning event. And if you really need PowerPoint, perhaps you don't have time to convert or it's a resource, you can import the presentation right into Miro and spend some time building activities up around it. All right, so let's move on to creating engaging spaces. You may have to zoom out a bit if you're zoomed in on the activities, but if you zoom out, you'll notice in the upper right-hand section, there is a purple next and a little arrow. If you click on that arrow, that should bring you over to our next activity space in the board. And if you're comfortable navigating in Miro, you can just navigate right as well too. But you should be seeing a little blackboard with some topics and a brainstorming flip chart. And if needed, we can also use the tip of bring everybody to me. So if you get zipped over all of a sudden, that's just me. That's just me zipping over. Fantastic. Okay. So when creating classroom spaces in Miro, I like to consider what the experience would be if we were face to face. Using a virtual platform like Teams or Zoom, Adobe, I might have a slide up with a discussion question or use polling, word clouds, but I wouldn't do that in a face-to-face classroom. I would have flip charts, I would have whiteboards, I would have blackboards and sticky notes or handouts on the desks, tangible items folks can interact with. In Miro, I can have my discussion topics in the activity space and include things like links to resources that could be leveraged during the activity. I also like to style my rooms, so kind of make it feel more like a physical space, put in some decor. There are a lot of great templates to start from, and you can play around with creating your own spaces using shapes and images and colors. I've got items on my blackboard with text that looks like handwriting, a flip chart for brainstorming. I find the visuals help put people in the right headspace and support the overall experience. I should tell you now, I didn't fully style all of my spaces today, but I have spent some time trying to ensure they were set up and tidy for this walkthrough. Also, a good time to mention that anytime I do build a space, there's usually a second or third pass where I find ways to make it look better or function differently to enhance the user experience. I think I went through this one in particular about 4 times before I got it to a place I was feeling good about. This Blackboard activity in particular would most likely be done in breakout rooms. When running classes, I would duplicate these spaces as many times as needed so that each group has their own space to work. The idea is we want to encourage folks to chat as well as ask questions, do some research, discuss what they're seeing or finding. Same expectations I have when you're in person sharing space and working together. We want active participation, not passive listening to someone else talking. I find that really makes the difference between simply presenting discussion topics and actually facilitating a discussion. It gives space for people to participate in a way that's impactful to them as well. Some people like to take the lead. They're asking the questions. Some are doing the research and offering up tidbits to shape the conversation. The point is, we have options and it should be an active experience. Having a space there for brainstorming will support the discussion and encourages folks to document their key points. Love for people to keep notes. Great when the notes are shared, collaborative. We can add to them, question them, comment on them. Again, the main thing is about creating that space and engaging and encouraging that active participation. It's one example, but there's multiple ways to set up a similar space. And I'd love for right now to invite you guys to zoom in on that brainstorming board, that white flip chart, if you can kind of zoom in. And there are some sticky notes there. I would love to ask you all right now, what are some things that you would explore? What would you use brainstorming for? What do you like about brainstorming? What are some considerations? And I know it's great. It provides options to explore. We want to feed curiosity. Maybe you've got some key things. If you're having a hard time finding room on the flip chart, put your stickies anywhere. I'm cool if you put them on the wall, next to the clock, wherever you can find space. If you're having a hard time grabbing a sticky, toolbar to the left of your screen. If you're less familiar in Miro, you can create a new sticky using the toolbar. It's the fourth option on your toolbar there if you want to add a new one, and just plug them in anywhere if you can't find space on that whiteboard. But yeah, what do you use brainstorming for? Why do you like it? What are some considerations? How might you use it in a Miro classroom environment? Let me zoom in and take a quick look here. We'll just spend a few ideas. No ideas are bad ideas. Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Everything sparks conversation. And I feel like, especially in a classroom and in particular online, the conversation and the contributions are what really spark everybody else's curiosity. Again, listening for extended, I know my attention span is like this big. So the more I can engage with others, my peers, even if we just all can't talk, but I can read and I can question, it still keeps me interested and engaged. And I might even put a comment in one of the stickies and ask a question to that person to see if we can start a little side conversation, right? But either way, I'm reading, I'm looking, I'm seeing what other people are adding. It's giving me ideas. So just gonna pause here for a couple more minutes while y'all add some more stickies. And feel free to, again, look around, read what everybody else is. I love the ideation with a team. Love Miro for learning experiences, but we've used Miro a lot recently for brainstorming and for running brainstorming sessions. And I love how quickly the page fills up, how much comes in, how many other pieces come from that. So that ideation with your team is a wonderful use case as well, too, in the classroom, online, wherever you're doing it. I've done it in person, not even just online, but in a room using Miro. Testing concepts, love it. Brain purge, oh man, brain dumps and Miro, it's a great place for it as well too. You can get everything out on the board and it's very easy and tidy to move around, which is also really nice about using this is I can get it all out there and then I can start sorting it, or as a team, we can start sorting it, but it's a really nice and easy way to do that. Miro makes it very easy to move things around and let you do that brain dump and then move things. So love it. What else do we have? Focusing, I love that. Focus on the task at hand. That's such an important part here. We're talking about trying to build engaging virtual learning experiences. And again, it's quite challenging, again, staring at a computer. But now if I'm not just staring at my screen, I can see a bunch of you guys participating, moving, and it's active. It's something that captures my curiosity too and seeing the new pieces. So I think that's a really important, a really key thing to call out. Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, let's just check out another example. Same thing, you can either scroll or if you go up towards the top right-hand side near the clock, there is a little arrow to pop you over to our next activity example. So you can use that arrow or you can just scroll yourself over. And as a fun tip, if you can see my screen, if you're wondering, or if you're less familiar with Miro, the toolbar, the arrow on the top will turn your arrow into a hand, which makes scrolling and navigating a little bit easier if you're looking for another way. So we talked a little bit about brainstorming, and leveraging it is a great way to keep folks engaged. We saw some comments actually on that last whiteboard about that. I'm going to use sales training as an example. I could talk about rebuttal options to common objections to my people, or we could brainstorm those together, discussing them, learning from each other. As a facilitator, I could throw in any point folks are missing or guide the conversation as needed. In addition to this, we can see people moving about or sitting idle. At this time, we can even start letting folks know about the toolbar in the top right-hand side of your screen. If you need help, you can go there, click raise your hand, and I know you need some assistance. And while we're at it, even just for this group, this is where the reactions are. So if you haven't checked this out in Miro, or if you're not familiar with it, look at the top right-hand side of your screen. There is what I like to call the party cone. Looks like a little cone with confetti coming out of it. And when you click on that, you've got a handful of options. There we go, got some party cones happening. You found it, fantastic. And so you can either raise your hand, ask a question, draw attention. If you like what someone's saying and you don't want to interrupt them, you can give a thumbs up, a heart, a surprised face, whatever it is. I just find it's a really nice way, again, to have that collaboration or that conversation without having to interrupt. And people get the option to be like, yes, I like that. And I want you to know that I like it. And everyone gets to see it, which I think is really nice and really fun as well. And then, of course, if someone does raise their hand, you can address them. This is a large group, so if I had to do that in this situation, I'd probably want to leverage the chat box. It might be difficult to hold a one-on-one conversation if you have many people, depending on your setup. But you can either chat live or you can use the chat feature within Miro, or we're often doing training sessions using Teams or another piece of technology. And so you might want to have a chat in the team session as well too, if you need to set something up privately. But you can figure that out depending on the size of your group. All right, so while we're here and we're talking about brainstorming, I would love to see your thoughts as well too. When would you use brainstorm over lecture? What are some ideas you might explore instead of talking about something? What would you want to sort of pose as a question to people, see what they're coming out of and what you need to add to it? Or even what are some considerations or some challenges you might see with that? Feel free to throw those on the board as well. Same thing, if you can't find a spot, put your stickies anywhere. It doesn't have to be just on the whiteboard. And if you can't grab a sticky, use the toolbar to create a new sticky for you. We'll pause here for a few moments so folks can add their ideas. When you're not an expert on the topic, I do love that. And facilitators may often find themselves in that position where you are facilitating a class. You've got your guide, you've got your materials, but you may be in a room of people who have similar or more experience at times than you do. And posing the question to the class and letting it kind of have that peer learning, I think can be really powerful. Even if even if you are an expert, that peer learning moment is so critical to a learning experience, that having that discussion, seeing what people come up with and identifying it really is really quite impactful. Not only is impactful, we can cover so many topics this way. I mean, sure, again, I could talk about, you could try this, you could do this, you could do this, but seeing it coming from everybody else, I think adds a lot to the conversation. We get to see a variety of options. You get to connect with something that may be more interesting, and more interesting for you. But it provides more opportunity for the participants and for the people who are in the room. Yeah, much more active. Don't want to listen. I mean, if you start listening to somebody talk for too long without doing something, your mind starts wandering as well, right? So I do like it for that also. There's also, again, that tie-in of you see people add something, sparks your own ideas, and then maybe you start a chat thread on that Post-it note, which is also really cool. And then you make a connection with somebody or you continue that conversation. And of course, anytime I do this type of activity, including right now, the board fills up really quickly. We end up with lots of ideas, lots of insight, lots to talk about, which again is the goal, right? We want to spark discussion. We want people to be curious and to be engaged, because curiosity leads to really powerful learning, right? The more we are interested and curious and want to know about something, the more likely we are to engage with it and to continue engaging. I also love the green sticky here about giving everyone the opportunity to share an idea. This is a great example too. We have, like 70 plus people, and now coming in here, it's 70 people can't talk all at the same time. Even in a classroom of 20 people, and not everyone doesn't always want to speak up either. Some people are more of the quiet contributors. So this really gives space for people to have a voice, right? That voice does not have to be vocal. It just has to be represented, and it really creates space for people, and creating space also is a very positive and engaging experience for people. So love adding that in there. So thank you so much. All wonderful examples. So be sure again that you're kind of taking some time looking around the board and taking a look at those examples. And be sure, if you want to, you can come back to this as well. All right, so one more example of engaging spaces. Same thing, find yourself to the right-hand side if you want to use the next button, or navigate and scroll yourself to the right, all the way over to this collaboration space, which looks like we've got some slides here and some other pieces. So as an example of group work, it is a great way to drive engagement and can be just as beneficial when you're virtual. Great way to support effective learning, but it's hard to create table work experience in a virtual breakout room. Usually you get 5 folks popped into a room and it's crickets until someone breaks the ice. So rather than wait for someone to offer up sharing their screen so everyone can work on the assignment, having the workspace in Miro puts everyone directly into the activity. Clear instructions are going to help so folks don't lose too much time figuring out who does what. And having that workspace means even the introverts, I'm one of them, so I appreciate this kind of thing, can contribute and without having to work up the energy to speak up right away. You can kind of start thinking or adding or noting stuff down. I like when everyone can work together on the activity versus one person kind of being the note taker or the writer. People can add comments if they want to, flag it for conversation. There's a parking lot. If anything needs to be addressed with the facilitator, again, we're often doing these in breakouts. If we don't have a facilitator per breakout room, maybe the facilitator is popping into each room, and when you come in, you address the parking lot together. So you've got that space there, and it becomes a much more productive and engaging breakout space. The other benefit is no one has to wait for someone to volunteer to be that note taker. Everyone is participating and expected to contribute. So that awkward moment of who's going to speak up first should be taken off the table. So in this activity, I was sticking with the sales theme. Folks would be collaborating to create their pitch deck as part of sales enablement training. I've locked down a lot of this if you're trying to interact with some of it, just to make it a little bit simpler for this example. But the group would be able to work directly on the slides, or you could give them some plain frames and have them do the styling of it. Either way, they would be working together on that. I have a screenshot that kind of what it looks like once you do it and you export it out of Miro, and I'll talk a little bit more about exporting in a minute. But I included a screenshot because once you're done, these frames I can export to PDF, and that PDF can be exported to a PowerPoint as well, and the text is all still editable. So even if we've now migrated out of the board and into PowerPoint, we can continue editing as needed. No duplication, which is my favorite. I don't like duplication of work. Nobody wants duplication of work. I'd also require people in these activities to work out their project roles. It helps with getting organized, but it also ensures everyone is participating. We don't want anyone fading into the background, even though the space is set up to encourage that collaboration. We want to make sure that everyone kind of has a role, knows what they're doing, and is able to work together. So we'll take a quick moment to reflect on this activity. We'll use the parking lot. What questions or comments do you have when it comes to creating this type of classroom space in Miro? Add them to the parking lot. We can maybe talk a little bit about them here. I've thrown a few examples on there as well. Zoom in on the parking lot for a better experience. And again, if you can't find space on the board, pop your sticky notes anywhere. But do you have any questions about it would look like? Any considerations, any risks you think with doing this type of activity online? Take a couple of minutes to let people pop some of those on the board. We've got, yes, perfect. I put a couple on here as well with some questions and some initial comments about how do we ensure everyone is actively participating? Great, we've assigned roles, but are they actually doing it? Or do we let them figure out their roles, or do we give them a structure? And with multiple groups, what's the best way to support people? And I usually like to say, if we can, have an extra facilitator, one for each room, or again, make sure you're zipping away. Oh, we've got a risk here for loud person complains that their parking lot item isn't addressed. Absolutely. There's always different personalities in the room, in any room, whether it's virtual or physical, different personalities and different people to be addressed and supported in different ways. And then we've got one here too is the in-class participants don't know how to use Miro and get lost. That's it's a really valid concern. And it's one that as the more you start using Miro and the more you start seeing some of those concerns with your folks and with people participating, setting up your board can help with that and get people comfortable using Miro. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes, just about the ways to try to get that navigation, that comfort level as early on as possible. But it's definitely a concern and a challenge. And hopefully the more we use it, the more people become familiar with it, which also helps and eventually becomes a known tool. Building some different types of activities can help as well too. And in one session, we built a more robust onboarding. It was almost like a crash course to Miro, where you did a bunch of things to get comfortable. But again, I mentioned early on that sometimes it's not always the best to spend too much time up front, but to let people fumble around. But it's absolutely a challenge that we have to address and know that people might get a little stuck or struggle. Prioritize parking lot items, gain consent with the team. I think that's really great. As a team, you can talk about what do we really like when the facilitator pops in, what's the most important thing on our board here that we want to be addressed to help us progress our work as well too. I think that's a really great call out. Managing a audience that is shy or nervous about sharing ideas in a visible space. That's such a great one. I talk a little bit about it in a minute, and we talk about different spaces and linking. There are a couple of ways where we can address that, including setting up more private workspaces. If we have smaller groups, maybe even individual workspaces can work nicely, where maybe I can pop you into a separate board and it's just your board and you have time to work and experiment until you feel comfortable to share. So there's a few different things we can explore, and I will touch on it a little bit in just a couple of minutes. And if you see a comment or question up there that you were thinking of and you want to add to it, you can like it, or you can add a comment to it. And if you're not as familiar with Miro, if you select a post-it note and you get a little toolbar up on there, you can actually add a comment onto it if you'd like to. Fantastic. So again, thank you for all of your input. You can keep adding if you do. Please note, I will come back to this board and reply additionally to any comments. So if you do want to revisit this board in the coming weeks. All right, so let's move on to our next section here. Find your next button. It will be in the top right above the scoring criteria, or you can zoom and navigate over. Great. So I talked a little bit about exporting. So now that we've looked at a few examples of those engaging spaces, I want to touch on this, which is something I really love about doing activity work in Miro, and it's the ability to export. We want people to refer back to their work. Maybe we even have an activity where it is necessary for them to work on something and take it back with them. Just gonna click the bring everyone to me in case you get zipped around. So in that pitch creation, we may have wanted people to work on it and export it, so they would have been able to. But in this example, I've got you're maybe doing a DIY development plan. So you can work on the board. Maybe this is one of those individual workspaces where people aren't working in a big group, but they're working one-on-one. Maybe it's in a more private space, but they're going to spend time working on it. Perhaps it's with a professional coach or somebody who's walking people through the process. And so they want to, actively participating, joining along. When they're finished with that, you can export it again into the PDF and into PowerPoint where you can continue working on it. And I've got some screenshots to the right of this board to show what that looks like. It comes out really nicely. We have to be intentional about the size of the frame we're using because once it's exported, we want it to be legible. So if I'm moving to PowerPoint, I'll use a 16:9 frame so that it goes really nicely, and be very mindful of the size of the object. So zooming in on your screen to kind of get the right idea, make sure the post-it notes are the right size or your text so you can still read it when you export it. In the PowerPoint ones, I use 16:9. In some cases, you may want to use the A4 or letter option, whatever your activity is to support best. The ability to export, though, is wildly helpful. Again, no duplication of work. And we can use it to create participant workbooks directly in Miro, which is a really cool feature. Buy pre-made PDFs and scrap pieces of paper, or keep it as that space for hands-on activity. Either way, it makes the activity engaging, and it's also great for custom job aids or reference materials or other learning assets. I can guess what folks want to take with them, or I can let you curate your own reference materials directly from the board. All right, let's move on to talk about navigation. So if you find the next arrow, fantastic. I love how people just already start going to it, which I think is really great. Fantastic, bunch of Miro experts, lovely. And if you don't, again, if you ever get lost on a Miro board, which I definitely did when I first started using Miro, zooming out to kind of get my bearings of the board and navigating around and then zooming back in again once I find was really helpful as well. So if you ever find yourself lost on anybody's Miro board, start by zooming out to try to orient yourself. It's my orienting in Miro sort of tip for the day. So we've been using arrows to navigate the board, and I'm a big fan of this for user experience. I like to link to the next activity. It keeps things simple, and I find the navigation is what people struggle with the most, just moving around the board and getting comfortable with the way the clicking and the dragging works. And so having those links and building them in makes it a little bit easier for people to follow along. Yes, you can do the follow option. I can see I've got some people who've already selected to follow me. And if you're not sure how to do that, you find if you find my icon on the board in that top right hand side, same place where the party cone is. If you find my icon and click on it, you can select an option that says follow, and anywhere I go on the board, you will also go. So that can be a really helpful tip to tell people. Also, as a facilitator, you have the option to bring people to you. It can be a little disorienting, so I do like to warn people before I do it. I'm going to pull you to me just so they're like, where did I go? But I do find the arrows and the linking to be the best option for navigation as it relates to user experience. I think it's a really amazing feature. And it also allows to navigate to different parts on the board. Somebody had mentioned earlier about what if you're shy? What if you don't want to share your stuff? What do you want to kind of work more privately? You can set up project spaces. You can set up group spaces, you can link to other boards. I've set up 4 examples here. You'll see activity 1, activity 2, activity 3. If you take a moment now and click the arrows next to each of the activities, it'll start popping you to different activity spaces. Each time you pop to a different activity space, you see the activity, you could do some work, and there's a navigation back to this main space. This one is more of a landing launch page. It could also be used as perhaps you're doing a case study in several parts. You might want to have people start together, go off, do some work, come back together, discuss, debrief, what have you, and then keep coming and going together. But having that navigation makes it really easy for people to go, do the work, and then come back together. So I'll just give you a couple minutes to kind of try out those arrows in that navigation. If you're watching my screen, if I zoom out, you can kind of see that is happening. And those spaces are over here. So we can see folks kind of flipping to and from. And again, as a facilitator, if you wanted to check on how people were doing, you would just move around the board, see how it was going. But I do like it for that. And then I do have one other example as it relates to navigation. Love the party cone. Thank you. If you move over to the right, again, either find the large next to the arrow next to the word next in purple, not the arrows for the activities, but it'll bring you over to some doors, which I just thought was a fun example of, okay, we've got 4 different groups and 4 different group workspaces, and you're going to find the door for your group and you're going to go to your space. They are 4 identical spaces, but they would be the space that each of those groups works on their stuff individually or together as a group. If you wanted to do more, like maybe you had a small group of people, it's a 6-person workshop, and we want that more private experience, we could have it set up that way so people are working independently. And if we want it to be really private, you can have them linked to a separate board. And I do have an example of that in that little light bulb with the little comment. It's a Miro icon instead of an arrow. When you click on that Miro icon, it takes you to a different Miro board. So if you did want to have those different spaces set up for people, you could leverage that as well. So just let people play around with that for a second. I do find the ability to move in a virtual classroom setting really adds to the experience. We can use changing colors, we can use different shapes and backgrounds. In this one, I have a consistently themed background, but I could have different spaces or different colors, different backgrounds, different decor, different objects, and link it to my lessons. That can be really powerful as well too. Another idea that I think would be so fun would be to have almost like a mini university where your board is set up with different like classrooms you can go into, and each one is themed differently for the topics that you're covering or working on, and having that experience for people certainly would be a build effort. But there are a couple of really cool templates that do something quite similar that if you're checking out the Miroverse, you can look for them. But it is a really neat experience. And again, that feeling of movement really adds to that engagement level. There's something to do and something to look at and somewhere to go. Again, we're more likely to keep our people with us, which is where we want them, is with us. In this one, I also have some parking lots set up so that as people are doing their work, if they're coming back, maybe they go off, they do the activity. This one's a rosebud thorn activity for people to do. We come back as a group and we discuss what were your key learnings? What do you want to share? What do you want to talk about? And we could use that parking lot or the plenary board or whatever it's going to be for that opportunity as well too. So you could use that space or set it up in whichever way feels good for you for your activity. All right, I've been doing so much talking, although you've been doing a lot of collaborating too, which has been great. So I really appreciate seeing all of you participate, collaborate, add in your thoughts. It's been wonderful. 45 minutes is only enough to really scratch the surface. But what I'm really hoping is that you're curious about how you can convert your virtual learning into a learning experience in Miro and start experimenting with what that might look like and why. And maybe you come up with some excellent ideas and maybe you make them templates. I do love the Miroverse for templates. If you don't know where to start, definitely start there. Lots of inspiration. If you move over one last time with me using the next button or dragging and navigating over, we're at the Q&A portion of our session today. So if you've got some questions, you can pop them onto the board here. You can put them in the chat if you're in the hop-in space, or if we'd like, I believe, Manishka, we can enable some mics, and if you'd like to speak up or chat or ask some questions. You can continue to throw them up on here. I will, like I said, come back to this board, and anything where there's been questions left, I will address them if you want to come back and take a look. And feel free to please look me up on LinkedIn if you do have any questions outside of this. But pause here for a second so folks can either comment, question, whatever it is.
Yes, I actually thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ashton. I actually do have some questions that I've been collecting
Great.
in the chat, and so as people put more questions on the board, I'll read some out to you.
Wonderful, thank you.
So one question we have here is a specific board available in the Miroverse?
A specific board or this specific board?
This specific board.
It's not this exact one. So this one is a little bit of a combination of a template I found with the two-tone. It is a different color, and it did have some different not classroom environments, but shapes. So I used that one as an original inspiration, but this one I made specifically for this session. I can definitely turn it into a template if anybody is interested in leveraging it.
Amazing. Thank you. Another question we have, oh, there's interest.
Okay, then I will work on that.
Amazing. Another question is, what Zoom percentage should we consider? And does that matter as much as the frame size?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I do try to start building my boards not already completely zoomed out, because then it doesn't leave people room to do the let me zoom right out and try to find myself on the board. I don't know. I mean, maybe somebody has an idea of what that percentage number might be. I don't have that perfect answer, but I do tend to start in the neighborhood of my screen when it's zoomed in is at about 33 to 40%, so that when you do zoom out, you get a really good sense of the board, but it's not like the entire thing, right? So that's kind of my sweet spot right now. But if anyone has a better idea, please do share.
Wonderful. Thank you. Another question we have is, if you have several groups, breakout sessions, is the idea to create one collab space for each group so that you can create your pitch activity? If you had 5 groups, would you create 5 of those sections prior to the session?
Yes, absolutely. I would build my boards once, and then I would duplicate those spaces. So similar to that last activity we saw in the linking and navigating example, where I had 4 identical workspaces for each groups. That's how I would do that. And then you could I use the doors as my launch page for people, because we're typically together in a group before we break out. So I want something to start from. Your landing page or launch page could look differently, but yes, I would duplicate as many times as needed for each group to work on their own space.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ashton. Thank you for that great question.
Yeah, great question.
I have one more question here. And so we do have a little bit of time. So if you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or directly in this board. I think there is one on the board that I'll actually let you grab, Ashton, before I share this last one.
Yeah. Do you want me to do this one for you, Seth?
Yes.
Yeah, so this one is, do you gather feedback on your sessions with Miro? Any tips, particularly how you deal with it not being very anonymous? I love this question because I haven't yet tried getting feedback using Miro, like directly to say, hey, how did you find this experience, and toss it up on the board. I feel like now I'm going to try that and see how it goes. Although I do find, generally speaking, when it comes to collecting feedback that is not anonymous, it really depends on your group and how you've set up the session, or who people are and how comfortable they are. Some people are really comfortable being very candid about their experience, how they're feeling, what they're seeing, what they want more of, what they want less of, and some people aren't. So I may even say this would be great to have both options. Here's the section on the board where we're asking for your feedback, and here is a link to Microsoft Forms where you could do an anonymous give your feedback sort of thing. So maybe even a double version of that would be great. But now I'm definitely going to try that. So thank you for the question.
Love. My other question, my last question here, and remember, we do have 2 more minutes. So if anyone else has any other questions, let me know, is how easy have you found it to go between group video and Miro Collab in a live session?
That's a great question. And I've been lucky enough to have some opportunities to use this in a few different settings with a few different types of people. I don't know if difficulty level is the one for me to utilize, because I find it really varies. I mean, there'll be folks who say, I'm not super comfortable with technology, or folks who are really tech savvy. And I find it's more about the awareness of understanding that your audience is going to have a very different experience and reaction to Miro. For the most part, even those who are kind of like, oh, I'm not tech savvy, enjoy the experience in Miro. And so we often start in teams, putting the link to the board and moving over. I've found that to be a pretty simple transition. People don't have any difficulty kind of going from teams, leaving that in the background and moving into the Miro space. It's not until we get in there and start trying to navigate, and then people asking questions and ensuring that we've got it set up in a way that we don't have too many people trying to speak up or talk over each other if they do have questions, and making sure we've got that in mind. So maybe not even a matter of how easy or how difficult, but that each one comes with different challenges, and your audience really impacts what that experience is going to be, what's going to look like. And the more prepared you are with your board with tips, tricks, chats, options, and ways to ask for help, the better it'll be for the entire group.
Amazing.
Sure.
We have one more question. I hope we can get to it. In the meantime, I will drop the link to Ashton's LinkedIn so you can connect with her there. Do you prefer the follow me function versus presentation mode?
Yeah, I do love I do love the follow me function. I don't know if I have a preference just yet over, but the follow me function I think is really quite nice, especially if you're building your boards in a more sort of organic way versus very zip to the next frame. Not everything is a frame in some cases as well too. You've got your different objects, they're different shapes sometimes, and sometimes I have larger ones and smaller ones for reference and whatnot. So I find the freedom of follow me allows for that to be a little bit more organic.
Amazing.
Mhm.
Well, that is our time. Ashton, if you have any last words.
I just want to say thank you so much to everybody. This has been awesome. I loved the experience. I've loved your input, your questions, your everything, the contributions on the board. It's been a really wonderful experience. So thank you for joining, and thank you for contributing.
Thank you, everyone.